Alright, everybody, welcome back. We're back to part 3 of our series review of Shokugeki no Souma, also known as Food Wars. So let's jump right into it. So today we're talking about the Stagiere period and the Moon Festival arc. So starting off, we're starting with the Stagiere period. So we have our summary. Basically, a Stagiere period is a internship that the students have in order to, of course, increase their culinary skills as well as bring a sort of rapport between our students and the existing restaurants within Japan that are basically tied to Totsuki in some way, shape, or form. We have Soma and Hisako that are paired together in order to take care of a place nearby the bullet train, one of the bullet train stops. So they're there to make a difference within the stagiaire period to basically help their business, and they do so by making sure that they take reservations because now with the bullet train stopping there, a lot of lunch rush people come in and a lot of people leave unhappy. This is, of course, suggested by Soma after the owner is having so many problems and he realizes that there needs to be some sort of change, even though there's a reluctance to do so because this is how the restaurant was always run by the owner's father and whatnot. But Soma realizes that they need to change with the times. Meanwhile, we have Erina and Tadakuro who change a much higher up restaurant. Erina doing most of that. She suggests, even small things like cooking something 1 degree hotter or a few seconds longer, something of that sort. Where Tadakuro has this moment where she realizes that there should be a sauce tray because a lot of people either waste their sauce or they always need more. And so in that respect, they're able to change that restaurant. The others also do something good, but we're not going to really cover it because it's barely even covered in the manga. So then we have the second part of the stagiaire period, which is Soma going to Shinomiya, Shino's Tokyo, which is his new restaurant within Tokyo. This is a much more harder challenge for Soma because now we're going straight up like Gordon Ramsay type of brigade style, where somebody's on the meat, somebody's on fish, somebody's on garnish, etc. And Soma has to keep up with everything, and everything has to come out all together in order to be perfectly successful. Even to the point of like Soma making unnecessary noises with like clanking the pots and pans can distract, and they'll even yell at him for that. This one is a lot harder for him because it's a fancy restaurant, it's Shinomiya's restaurant, and he has to really get it right. So Soma goes goes ahead and starts to learn, and after that he gets involved in the contest to add some kind of dish to the menu. He does not. I don't believe he actually wins, although he does develop a recipe that sort of reflects his cooking, which is a growth from his previous arc in the autumn elections, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. So he passes the stagiaire period, and when he comes back, he has a bunch of shokugekis waiting for him, which he accepts all of them, and begins to learn more and more by challenging, or accepting the challenges rather, and his condition for winning is that they teach him like their secrets of what their specialty is. That way he can learn more and more. So that's our summary. Let's get into the character development. So starting off with the side characters, pretty much everybody was a side character in this arc, except for Soma, Hisako, Tadakuro, Erina, Shinomiya, and a couple others. They all make it through. There's not much development. Obviously, their cooking has developed, and we see the fact that they passed the stagiaire period is proof of that. But there's really not much. And I think that's a good thing because we really do need to focus on Soma mostly, and this arc does a good job of doing just that. Let's talk about Hisako a little bit. So Hisako is a character that hadn't had much development beforehand. We saw a little bit in the autumn elections. We saw a lot of setup, like I said before, with Hayama beating her and then telling her, like, you need to be aiming for number one, not just, aiming to be under Erina all the time. And Hisako really does grow in the first part of this arc as she pairs up with Soma, and then she does what she can do and realizes, like, you know, I can do this. Like, I can do this in my own way, and I can stand next to Erina, not just behind her. And of course, her relationship with Soma grows as a result, and she no longer hates him. She only hated him because Erina hated him. That's the only reason she ever hated him. But now she actually likes him and joins the harem. So that was good on Yuto for developing Hisako, even though she's not super, super important. She has enough importance that she needed the development. So let's talk next about Shinomiya and his crew. So his crew is nice. We got introduced to a couple of them. There was Abel, who was the sous chef, soon to be head chef, I believe, of that Shino's Tokyo, because Shinomiya, I don't think, was going to be there. Um, there was the Chinese waitress that was also a cook, and then there was the shorter girl with the short hair. I can't remember her name off the top of my head. They were all good, and they all had their own, you know, somewhat personality. They had enough for the short amount of time that they were in it. Basically, they didn't need to be overcomplicated characters. They were simple, but they were effective. Shinomiya himself, you can see the results of his growth as a result of the training camp arc. He's a lot different than he was. Although he's very harsh and he has his moments of like being hard on Soma and the others. You can tell he really cares for his people, and he even gives Soma advice here and there. And he respects Soma more, and Soma respects Shinomiya a lot more as a result. So Shinomiya at this point is an awesome character. He was good from the beginning, really, but this arc really just shows how great he is after all of that. Not much to say about Tadakoro for this arc, but I'm gonna just briefly mention that she had a little bit of development, of course, when she decided to, you know, put in some input after seeing what Erina was doing. So she was a dishwasher for her restaurant, but at the same time, just being a dishwasher, she was able to come up with something to improve, and she didn't need Soma to do it, which is incredible. So it's a small, but it's an effective and important growth for Tadakoro or Megumi, whatever you prefer. Erina, we at least get more screen time from Erina in this process, although she hasn't grown from this. It's a good development of her character in a sense that we get more from her. We actually get to see her cook again, and we get to see how she handles like the adults and the higher ups. It's more like there are more moments to solidify her character before shit goes down, which we're gonna cover close to the end of this video. So Soma is the last one we're gonna talk about before we move on to the story. Soma has he solidifies even further in this arc, and he grows quite a bit. The first the first part of it, not so much. Although he has really good character moments, like with Hisako, and then realizing what the Stagiere period is all about, and he does a good job there. But of course, his real growth is during the second part of the Stagiere period. So the second part of the Stagiere period with Shinomiya is where he really starts to shine and develop, because now he's struggling, and now he's forced to make changes, or he's forced to learn, and you see that he spends like all night prepping for the next day, learning this is how you julienne and stuff like that, where he initially he would have been more like, I do things my way and that should be good enough for you, but now he's forced to do things Shinomiya's way in order to adapt and grow. So, in that case, it's a really, really good moment for him when you also see him in the contest when he starts to learn like what is his cooking, and there's a flashback to when uh, Ishiki spoke to Soma about the poale that he did on his fish when he did the very short Shokugeki between Soma and Ishiki in when he first got to the Polar Star Dorm. So it was a really good callback there, and that is when he started to develop his sense of what his cooking is. So there's some really, really good character moments for Soma. And then, of course, we get when he comes back from the Stagiaire period, which is by far his coolest look in the entire series, is when he gets that longer hair, and that art design is just incredible. You can see the results of his growth from the Stagiaire period as he takes out like Skewers Kun, whatever you want to call him, Skewers person, and probably takes out everybody in his Shokugeki list. So that's it for character development. It wasn't a too terribly long of an arc, but it was very, very effective in terms of character development. The story, the concept of the stagiaire period is great. It makes perfect sense. I mean, haven't we heard of this kind of thing before? Possibly, you may have heard of this thing before, where after the sports, I mean the autumn elections, there's some sort of internship program based on how you did in the autumn election. I mean the sports festival. I mean the autumn elections, and there were potential suitors for you to kind of grow and develop. So yeah, I think we've probably heard of that before. But Soma came first. Let's not jump around that bush. Soma came first before that other manga. So if anybody ripped off anybody, it wasn't Yuto. But no, it makes perfect sense that the autumn elections comes and then there's immediately the stagiaire period is right after. The overall story is definitely developing and improving at this point because although it's not in of itself a better arc than the autumn elections, it builds on the autumn elections and really sort of it raises the stakes in some ways and raises everything. So yeah, good on Yuto for this arc. It was short but sweet. Now going into the Moon Festival arc. So the Moon Festival arc really starts off when there's a meeting of the Elite Ten, and you see all the ones that you haven't seen before. So obviously we know about Erina, we know about Azon, we know about Ishiki, but now we get all the others. So it's really interesting how we get to see them all. And then basically Kuga is the one that accepts Soma's challenge for a Shokugeki if he can beat Kuga in the Moon Festival arc in terms of sales. So then they explain what it is, the Moon Festival, where everybody gets their own stalls or restaurant buildings, whatever, in the three different places. There's like the common area, then there's like the upscale common area, and then there's the really, really upscale area. I don't remember the exact names for them, but basically if it was a dollar sign thing, like if you ever go on like Google or whatever and you're looking for restaurants nearby, they'll have like a one, two, or $3 sign thing. You have $1 sign, $2 signs, and $3 signs. So you could go in one of those three areas. So you have Soma and Tadakoro working together, and you had Alice, Hayama, and Kurokiba working together, and then various others. Erina choosing to go in the $3 sign area and having her own thing. So that goes on, and Soma is losing horribly to Kuga in the first couple days until he decides to employ the help of Subaru and Takumi, where between the four of them, they're able to actually beat Kuga in one particular day. and it's somewhat similar to the way that he was able to clear those 200 plates after Erina did in the training camp arc, with the live cooking and being right next to them. After that, they end up winning that last day, and they end up not being in the red. Rindo, the second seat, comes in and invites Soma and Tadakuro to go with her to try out some of the dishes of other people. One of them being the first seat, Tsukasa Eishi, which is an incredible sight for them because obviously it's the first seat and the food is, unbelievable to them. And that brings us into Erina's restaurant place where we have the introduction of Azumi Nakiri, Erina's father, which he basically insults a bunch of people, goes outside, and that's when Senzaemon arrives. And that's where we're going to pick up in the next video, is right there. Although technically what follows is part of the Moon Festival arc, it's more important to the central arc. So we'll talk about Senzaemon getting dethroned in the next video, but I may briefly mention stuff about it. So let's move on to the character development. We have a lot here, so I'm going to very briefly go over some of them. We have the Elite 10, the first impressions from a lot of the Elite 10. We have Rindo, who is awesome. She's amazing from the beginning. She's like very quickly became a lot of people's favorite female character. I probably agree. Her and Alice were my two favorite female characters in the whole series, and of course we'll get there again at the very end. We have some of the others didn't really speak much, like Nene or Akane or like Megashima didn't really say much. None of them. Tsukasa Eishi, his first impression was really interesting and funny. How he's like really self-conscious, but when he starts to cook, it's a completely different person. And when we get to his restaurant, like Tsukasa Eishi is the man. He is awesome, and the art style for him, like when they showed him as like a knight and all that, just brilliant. Tsukasa Eishi very quickly became one of my favorite characters as well. Kuga, Kuga was fun. He was interesting. I think when I reviewed those parts, I was like, "Is Kuga a girl? He kind of looks like a girl." Which, I mean, to be fair, kind of, but at the same time, it's not a big deal. You know, Kuga's interesting, quirky, whatnot. Balances out the people like Tsukasa Eishi and Ishiki and whatnot. So briefly, I'm going to mention Hojo, who comes back just to help out with the Szechuan cooking for Soma, because that's kind of her thing, and he needed to challenge Kuga to that Chinese cooking. She's definitely grown since the autumn elections. We can see the results of like her defeat at the hands of Megumi here, and she's willing to help out, which is great. Briefly, I'm going to talk about Subaru and Takumi. You can see that they've grown their skills, and Takumi has made a full rebound as far as his personality goes. He's not like, super depressed anymore like he was in the autumn elections. He's back and he's working at the same speed as Soma and Subaru. So, good on him, good on Subaru for coming back and fighting with Soma and Takumi. So it was really, really nice that they were able to have this cohesive final day. It was good character development for those two. Alice, Hayama, and Kurokiba, not much, but they're really interesting. They have absolutely hilarious trio going in terms of a conversation. It's just great moments for them. Not much development, but at the same time, it's just hilarious. They they do manage to finally work together eventually, which means they have grown in some ways. Tadakuro, again, not too much because she was already awesome, but she really proves herself with Soma and Takumi and Subaru. So, you know, we have while she doesn't have much development so much, she is a really solidified character in this particular arc. Soma, Soma definitely grows because he starts to learn the business side of things and turning a profit and you know again more of his cooking and all of that. There's not too much for Soma. Again, there are more character moments that solidify his character, like the "I have 10 more years of experience than you, senpai" moment when he says that to Kuga is amazing. Of course, the art style on that page. I'm just gonna keep talking about the art style, but regardless, Soma has some really great moments in this arc. Of course, when he sits down next to Azumi and is like, mind if I eat with you, is also a great moment. Erina. Now, this is where we can finally start talking about Erina's development, because although her growth really comes in the central arc, this arc really gets that snowball going, because at the end of the arc, of course, she's friggin' terrified of her father, and that in itself is instant growth, because now we start to see that there are layers behind her background, and there are layers to her character, and that she's not just a snob. She has feelings, and she is human. So that's where her growth really starts, is in this arc at the very end, and it's a good thing. Obviously, we knew it was coming because you know we knew that she was going to have to be redeemed somehow, or she would become the villain. It was going to be one or two, one of two methods. Lastly, we're going to talk about Azumi. Obviously, we're introduced to him, and we don't know much about him, but he is a friggin' snob, just like his daughter, and he insults the shit out of these high-end gourmet people right in the middle of Aaron's restaurant, which is bold and crazy. So very quickly, we're introduced to him as a very psychedelic type of character. Even again, the art style, his eyes are drawn in such a way, and some people even mentioned on comments of when I reviewed these chapters, that he kind of looked like Hannibal Lecter. And in some ways, yeah, it makes sense. In some ways, it's very interesting. So Azumi is actually, I think, is a great introduction, a very, very interesting one. And of course, when he pulls out that paper that revokes Senzaimon's position and puts Azumi as the new director, I mean, if that's not a threat, I don't know what is. But again, we'll get there in the next video. So in terms of story, the concept of the festival is actually really great. So following, of course, the internship, now we have our version of what most Japanese high schools have, which is the culture festival. And if you ever watch any slice of life anime, there's always a culture festival if they're in high school, obviously. And it's always like maid cafe, haunted house, etc. And this is a really good twist on the culture festival, because it's a restaurant based, school. It's all about food and cooking. Obviously, they're all going to be cooking. That's going to be their culture festival. And in this case, it's all about turning a profit, and it's all about, managing your property right and picking the right area for your cooking. So it had a higher stakes than the regular culture festivals have, and on top of it, it was much more interesting. So really, again, good on Yuto for taking a traditional concept in anime and really flipping it on its head. Because the culture festival is usually like a wind down period in anime. In this case, it was quite the opposite. The battle between Soma and Kuga was awesome, because again, it's realistic, because Kuga is a better cook right now. He is an Elite 10, and he has an army of Steves that are able to do his bidding and make it even better and mass produce his cooking, which, again, is much better than Soma's. However, it also makes sense that Soma could win one day, when it comes to having Tadakura on his side, having Takumi and Subaru on his side on the last day after you would assume most people have had Kuga's cooking, but they haven't had Soma's cooking, so it's realistic in that way. So I think they did a good job of writing that particular part of the story, so that Soma, he may have lost, but he had some moral victories here and there. When it comes to Azumi's entrance, it's really, really good for the story because Azumi, he becomes the villain that the story was not necessarily lacking, but just didn't have. And he will become the central villain, pun intended, for almost the rest of the story. And it makes sense that it comes from the Nakiri family, and especially somebody that has power over Erina. So Azumi's entrance is great. It comes out of nowhere. You're not expecting it, and it's a really good change of pace from what we see. Of course, things are escalating a bit, and then things just escalate even further with Azumi. What it means for the story is this is gonna change. It's gonna get darker, and it's gonna set us up for some really, really good stuff. Whether or not it's executed properly, we'll talk about that in the next video. But yeah, so that's gonna go ahead and do it. With these two arcs, the story is improving overall, and although these arcs again are not as good as the autumn election arc individually, it really layers onto the overall story. So in my book, they're both very, very good. So that'll about do it, guys. I hope you guys are enjoying the series, and next we're going to talk about Central, and that is going to include all the way through the regimental Shokugeki. So please stay tuned. We got a lot to talk about next time.